Hi everybody, it's Annabelle and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at some orchids in bloom, some buds, some flower spikes and just some general things that are happening in the grow room right now. So I hope that you do enjoy this video. So without further ado, let's get started with this gorgeous Cattleya that we have in front of us. And this is the Cattlianthe Jewel Box Dark Waters variety, which has true red flowers, some of the most red flowers that I've actually ever seen on an orchid, let alone a Cattleya. And this is thanks to its Sophronites parent. One of the other main parents is Cattleya dowiana, and from that it inherits a wonderful sweet spicy fragrance that is very common among Cattleya hybrids, which is probably actually from the dowiana. Now, I've never had the Cattleya dowiana in bloom, but it stands to reason that if that's another major parent in this hybrid and we've got a nice fragrance coming through and we know that the Sophronites aren't fragrant, that potentially the fragrance could be coming through from the dowiana. I don't know. And dowiana is one of the major species used in Cattleya hybrids today, so it could be that that fragrance comes from the dowiana. I don't know. Let me know if you know down below. But it has just the most beautiful, wonderful red flowers that I think you could ask for from an orchid. There are some other clonal varieties of this which have more pinkish red flowers, I believe, but the Dark Water seems to have more of a yellow base to the red, which gives it that more vibrant red coloration. You can see the yellow coming through in the center just above the lip, so I think it is that yellow base that's giving it that beautiful, beautiful red color. And this is probably from the Guaranthe parent as well that's in this, so it has some really great parents in it to make up this red hybrid, so it's not surprising that the red coloration is so strong and beautiful. Now, this is the first blooming for me, and it had to get to quite a large size to start blooming, but once they're blooming I believe they are very prolific bloomers, and this could just be something in my care. I got this as a seedling from Orchid Garden just over 3 years ago, and it said 3 years to flowering size, so I think it was fairly accurate. It cost me around £4. And this is why I think that seedlings or young plants are a fantastic way to expand your collection without having to outlay too much money if you enjoy growing orchids for the journey as much as for the flowers, because it's even more rewarding when a plant that you've had from a seedling blooms from the first time. And this is the first Cattleya type of that selection that I got as seedlings to bloom. So in that regard, it's bloomed ahead of the other seedlings that I got, which were more species Cattleyas. It's got really large flowers as well, which is a kind of standout feature for this orchid. Very large red flowers along with the fragrance. I think all round it's a bit of a classic hybrid that's very famous. It's been around for quite a long time, but it's kind of stood the test of time, and I think should be just as popular today as it was when it was first generated, because it's a really wonderful hybrid. You don't often get really good form on a flower and fragrance and compact, easy growing, prolific blooming. All of those things are kind of what make up a fantastic orchid, aren't they? And this has it all, so what's not to love? Some other Cattleya flowers that take the red coloration from Sophronites coccinea or other Sophronites parents can sometimes be smaller plants, but also have smaller flowers. And this one has very large flowers, so I think it gets that from the Cattleya dowiana in the parentage. But the fragrance it inherits as well, which a lot of the hybrids won't inherit the fragrance, so it's kind of impressive in that regard that it carries the fragrance through and a large flower but a compact plant form. Next up we have Phalaenopsis Mannii black variety crossed with Phalaenopsis Schilleriana, and this is often known as Phalaenopsis Schillman or Phalaenopsis bronze maiden. This hybrid is extremely popular, and the first time I ever saw it was on Bumblebee's channel, which I will link down below in the description. You should really check that video out for an impressive specimen. My one or two, should I say, we just bought as seedlings from Schwerter a year ago, 2 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. And they're doing well. They never retain more than 4 leaves, unfortunately. They're very small plants, but they have, one of them has bloomed. I've got them potted together. I wanted to get 2 in case there was any seedling variation in the flowers, but I'm really happy with the flower that I got. They have beautiful silvery grey leaves with little freckles on and red undersides to the leaves. The leaves actually are almost beautiful enough that you wouldn't care what the flowers look like, but on top of that I've got a gorgeous flower structure. Some of them do take after the Schilleriana more. Missorchidgirl has a flower that takes after the Schilleriana more than the Mannii in the structure. Mine has a wonderful structure I love. I'm really happy with the plant that I got from this, and it has a mild sweet fragrance as well, so best of both worlds in my opinion, and I love mine. Next up we have the Brassavola Little Stars, which is Brassavola nodosa crossed with Brassavola cordata. This is a really wonderful little hybrid that you'll see everywhere, all over the internet, all over forums. It's just a very popular, free blooming, easy growing hybrid that has a wonderful, wonderful, strong, soapy, expensive fragrance that I find very similar to Angrecums. So I had an Angrecum in bloom a couple of months ago, which to me smell almost identical, and you can kind of understand why. Angrecoids and Angrecums are pollinated by moths at night. They have large pale white flowers to attract nighttime pollinators and long nectar spurs. Brassavola orchids are also pollinated at night and have large pale yellowish to white to cream flowers. So it would kind of make sense, I guess, that some of the nighttime blooming orchids with pale flowers may have a similar fragrance, because maybe they attract a similar pollinator, if not the same pollinator. Moths, I guess, maybe are attracted to a certain type of fragrance compared to flies or butterflies. So I guess it makes sense that it has a similar fragrance to Angrecoids, but the bonus of this one is that it's very free flowering. Now, I only got this one in the summer last year, which I actually unboxed on camera. It took right off in my care actually, and I was a bit worried because I've had some difficulty with some Brassavolas in the past, but this one, it just took right off. The flower itself is relatively large compared to the compact growing nature of the actual plant, with terate, chubby, pencil-like leaves, but quite a small plant. It may grow much bigger, I don't know, but I'm really, really happy with how this is doing, and as it gets more mature, we can hope for more flowers at once. Next up, we have a wonderful Cymbidium with a cascading flower display, which I bought as a no ID from a garden centre. I repotted all of my Cymbidiums with you guys following the house move, and they took right off, and they're actually all spiking. This one is the first one to bloom. It has a wonderful sweet fragrance that I absolutely love, which was what attracted me to this one, because the flower colours are very similar to a Cymbidium I already have, which has larger flowers and a more upright flower display. But this one had a fragrance which I immediately noticed and attracted me to it. So I got this one, and it then proceeded to never bloom for me again, just grow massive. But it's now bloomed for me, so I'm super, super excited and happy that it's bloomed. It's a very big plant, but I'm really happy. It has another flower spike starting around the back, so we might have a display that carries on a little bit longer. We can see that the first flower that opened from this is starting to fade already, so doesn't seem to be a particularly long-lived flower, but really wonderful fragrance. And I just find them so cute. They're kind of cupped and small, which is in contrast to some of my other Cymbidiums, which have very large, floofy flowers. These ones have more structure, they're a little bit more waxy, and I just love the little freckles inside the flower, as well as the coloration. I'm a sucker for yellows and pinks in combination with each other, so any variation of flower that has yellow combined with pink, I'm immediately attracted to. And if you can throw in a fragrance in there as well, then I'm sold. So I love this Cymbidium. So it's a no idea, unfortunately. Next, I'm going to disappoint you all by showing you some buds, but I'm so excited I just wanted to share. So this is my Iwanagara, now Jackfowlieara Appleblossom, pink variety. I got this one near the start of my channel actually, so over a year ago now I think, and it's one I'd hunted for such a long time, mainly due to the famous fragrance that was reported with this one. Now this is a very common hybrid to get in the US and other parts of the world, but in the UK and Europe, unfortunately, it is much harder to get hold of. It's a wonderful plant, grown amazingly for me, and has never bloomed until now. So I think what needed to happen for this to bloom was seasonal triggers. It's not been getting any more light, it's actually been getting much less light than it got in my old setup, but my new setup with the new house, I get large seasonal variations, and that seems to have been enough to trigger some of my stubborn blooming orchids into spiking. Not all plants will need a seasonal variation to bloom. Some will rely on it more heavily than others, and I think the Iwanagara Appleblossom and its grandparent, the Caularthron bicornutum, do need a spring to winter difference to be able to tell that it is time to bloom. So I'm excited when this does bloom to show you guys. Next we have a naturally occurring hybrid between Cattleya or Guaranthe orontiaca and Schilleriana, which is Guaranthe guatemalensis, which also seems to have another name, Guaranthe Leliodes. So join me on a confusing name tour later, but for now I'll just show you the blooms. They're absolutely gorgeous. They have this wonderful watermelon, coral, pinkish orange coloration that's just so unique to this hybrid in my opinion. It is a naturally occurring hybrid, so you will see it referred to as a species in some instances because obviously it is found in nature. It's not a hybrid that's been generated by orchid collectors or orchid hybridizers. Although obviously that is another way that it is obtained now. It was originally recorded in nature. So it's a wonderful plant, very, very large growing. It produces a very large root system very quickly and adapted to semi-hydro with leca, no problems. It's now in a larger self-watering pot with leca. The confusing thing is, it's referred to as Guaranthe Cattleya guatemalensis. The X indicates a naturally occurring hybrid. It's now been reclassified to Guaranthe where it was previously Cattleya, I think. But it's also found under Leliodes, something, which I didn't know until I started researching this hybrid a bit to show you for this video. I was going to talk to you about the X that occurs before naturally occurring hybrids to kind of let you know that they are natural hybrids, but I found 2 records for this name, so I don't know what's going on there. If anyone has any information on that, let me know in the comments down below. I'd be super interested to hear about it, but it's worth noting that you may find this under 2 names, just in case you're looking for it. Either way, wonderful, wonderful plant. It did come to me from the seller with some sunburn, or they told me it was sunburn. If you guys saw me unbox it or saw me repot it, you'll know that I was a little bit iffy about it back then, but I trusted the seller, so I thought nothing of it really. I did then isolate it because I was a little bit unsure and I wanted to see what the new growths did. And the new growths come in with this kind of leaf streaking that leaves me a little bit unsure, but the flowers themselves are really clean, so I'm not sure what's going on there. I don't think it's something that this hybrid is susceptible to. I don't believe it's viral because I've never seen any sign of virus in the flowers, and this has bloomed for me twice now, but it is a little bit suspect, and I'm going to treat it with a systemic antifungal and see if it resolves or not. Next up we have the beautiful Phalaenopsis Sweet Memory Liodoro. This is a really popular, really common hybrid. Despite the citrusy fragrance, it's actually a hybrid between Phalaenopsis violacea and Phalaenopsis deventiara, and deventiara is a primary hybrid again, so this is quite close to species. So you get multiple spikes with lots of flowers, and the spikes will branch out lots, and if you leave them on, they will continue to bloom the following years, as well as branching more. Really large flowers with a mild, sweet, citrusy fragrance, which can become quite strong when there's a lot of sunlight and you've got multiple flowers on a plant. My particular plant has quite a few spikes that it's kept from last year. It's also starting a couple of new ones, so this year we're going to get quite a good show. Obviously it becomes a little bit sporadic when you've got these long flower spikes with a few flowers at the end, because it does tend to try and produce very long spikes in my experience, and branches lots. So we've got lots of branches coming on the existing spikes here, as well as new spikes, buds closer to the plant as well from some of the branches from nodes nearer the base of the flower spikes. So actually this is probably going to be quite a good display once it gets going. Individual flowers are very long lasting as well. Next up, I've just got a complex hybrid, no ID, Peloric Palaenopsis that I thought I'd show you. I've shown it before. It blooms pretty much all the time, to be honest, so it's nothing new or special, but it's a really cute, pretty hybrid. It's not my favourite type of Peloria. It blooms really reliably and it has these really long flower spikes with long cascades of flowers. I do kind of want to chop this one, I think. It gets to the stage where the spikes get very long, and like with the Liodoro, the displays become a bit ungainly. Next, not quite in bloom, but this is the first spike for me. So I wanted to show you my Phalaenopsis Little One, which is Siderea japonica crossed with Vanthopsis parisi. And the spike is starting to develop buds, so I'm really excited for that. And also first blooming from a seedling. This is Phalaenopsis bellina crossed with Tetraspis C1. I do have 3 of these. I bought them to see if there was any seedling variation. Just quickly show you my Phalaenopsis samira, which is bellina crossed with Violacea, and my Phalaenopsis Violacea on the left. But the samira, the new leaf on it, is absolutely beautiful, so I really wanted to show you because I'm really happy with how it's doing. Next, I'm going to show you one that has kind of stolen my heart. So this is the Epidendrum lehmannii. If you've been following my channel, you may have seen me unbox this from my Equigenera order back in the autumn, but this is a fantastic plant. Now, it came to me with a new growth starting, and you could tell it was going to be quite a chunky new growth. The leaves were looking like they were going to be quite large when they came in, and it didn't disappoint. The new growth is absolutely huge. It then, after a month or so after it matured, the new growth, it developed a sheath, and from that buds have emerged. And I was actually hunting around my grow room for the scent about 1 in the morning for this one. So I went out just to double check on things before bed after quite a long day, and I smelled this amazing, incredible fragrance, and I was hunting around trying to figure out what it was, and it was this one. It had just opened up. So it's a nighttime fragrant epidendrum. The reported fragrance on orchid species is that of papaya, but yeah, I don't get papaya from it at all. I get maybe hyacinths, floral bubblegummy fragrance that I have kind of smelled on the Neophonetia falcata crossed with Rhynchostylus celestis. So that one has like a floral bubblegum type fragrance that I detect undertones of with this flower. There might be a more simple or straightforward fragrance reference point that I'm missing, but to me that's kind of how this smells. But also the best parts of nighttime fragrant orchids all rolled into one. So if you think of a Brassavola fragrance or an Angrecum fragrance, the best ones, not the ones that don't smell so good. This is kind of those, and hyacinths and floral bubblegum all rolled into one. It's a very difficult fragrance to describe, and I can't think of a better way to describe it, to be honest, but it fills the entire room. I just wish that I could carry this plant around with me all day with the fragrance, but it is night fragrance, so don't get to enjoy it during the day, unfortunately, or I would be carrying this plant from room to room with me. The flowers themselves are not show-stopping, as you can see. They've got a charm to them, and I find them really interesting, and I personally really like them, but they're not flashy in the way that some bright, colourful epidendrums are. They're subtle, and I think they're beautiful and interesting and kind of intriguing in their shape, and the kind of 3-spurred lip that they have, and then the petals and sepals that are flared backwards, almost like it's jumping. I find it really interesting and elegant in a way, but it isn't showy by any means. You'll often find this with night fragrant orchids. They sacrifice showiness for fragrance. Pale colours like greens and whites show up better in the nighttime for their moth pollinators, and obviously they need a strong fragrance to draw them in. I brought this into my lounge now so that I can enjoy it in the evenings. To be able to enjoy this, obviously at not 1 o'clock in the morning when mostly I'm not up, what I do is I put it on my desk where it gets some residual light from a shelving that I have in the lounge, and then I turn the lights off at night. Because if you bring this into your home and just leave the lights on as normal, it will still think it's daytime, so it won't release the fragrance. So I put it in a darker corner so that it can begin to perfume the lounge during the evenings. Next, I'm just going to show you an odd blooming from my Oncidopsis Lazio, and this is a Inca Orchids ID, so take it with a pinch of salt, but it's just been in bloom for the last 3 months now, so thought I'd show you some. And then I've got my Phalaenopsis Chingrueys Goldstaff, which is a really common hybrid that you'll often find around in supermarkets. I got this one from a nursery, but you don't need to buy it from a nursery. You can quite often find this in supermarkets in the EU at least. It's doing really well. As usual, it's a very reliable bloomer and it's just extending its spike at the moment with a cluster of blooms at the end of the spike. Next up, I'm going to show you my no ID pink and yellow complex hybrid Phalaenopsis. Now there's 3 that are near identical, which are the Phalaenopsis KV Beauty, the Phalaenopsis Bolden's Kaleidoscope or Phalaenopsis Apollo, and there's actually more that look near identical. There's seedling variation for all of these because they're not clones. And there's some overlap. I have another very similar pink and yellow Phalaenopsis, which again is one of those, but I couldn't tell you which. I try and kind of give you a rough idea of IDs with some of my no IDs where I can, just in case you're searching for something similar. But to me, it doesn't matter that much. I love growing the plant for the plant. I love the beautiful flower display that I get from this one. I think it's wonderful. I think the only purpose of me putting an ID on it is so that you guys can potentially look for one if you wanted one similar. My Cymbidium pink Parnasse is also in bloom. I got this one from a seedling and this is the first blooming from it, and the bud's absolutely huge, so I'm really excited for them to open up. Next up we have my Myrmecatavola, formerly Rocara, Frances Fox, which is a fantastic orchid hybrid that inherits the very curly, twisty petals and sepals of its Myrmecatavola parent. It's a wonderful, wonderful plant with a night fragrance that I think it inherits from Brassavola. To me, it's most strongly fragrant from sort of quite late hours of the night to the early hours of the morning. By the time I get up, the fragrance is just starting to fade. So it's not a massive overpowering scent, and it's again an inconvenient time, but if you wanted to try and trick it into being fragrant in your living area in the evenings, you can again pop it in a dark corner, trigger it with turning some lights off, and you can usually get the night scent that way. It's a wonderful plant, grows like a weed for me to be honest, and it desperately needs a repot. I accidentally knocked one of the new growths off recently that was growing outside the pot, so I need to tackle that when it stopped blooming. Next, I'm going to show you a brief recap of some of my Dendrobium nobile hybrids, which are often referred to as Dendrobium nobilis or Dendrobium nobile types. In reality, they often have very little of the nobile parent in their genetic makeup in terms of percentage, but they're complex hybrids that are regularly sold in garden centres, supermarkets. You can get hold of them easily, easy to grow, and definitely a kind of next step up for Phalaenopsis. For if you're just starting out your orchid journey, the next kind of logical progression would be these and Dendrobium Phalaenopsis or Cattlianthe type. Very easy to grow. The extent to which they require a winter rest varies depending on their species makeup, because there's so many complex hybrids involved in these that some of them don't need a winter rest at all. My 2, the Spring Dream Apollo and the Comet King, don't need a winter rest in order to bloom, but some of them will. The Spring Dream, in my experience, drops leaves on the older canes more than the Comet King does. The extent to which they're deciduous will again vary depending on the species made up in their parentage, so check the species out kind of for an indicator, but sometimes it's just play it by ear and see what the orchid's doing. And I never stop watering or fertilising these and they bloom just fine. So for these 2, I don't really think a winter rest is necessary, but I'm not saying that some of them don't need a winter rest. It's just in my experience, these 2 in my environment don't, and it could be because they're getting some seasonal triggers as well. They're kept on the kitchen windowsill, both in the old growth space and this, so tend to get slightly cooler nights, especially in winter, so they probably know that it's winter and they know when spring is coming just from that. So maybe when there are some seasonal triggers, they don't need any drying, and if you don't have seasonal triggers, maybe they do. Next, I'm going to show you, you guessed it, another no ID Phalaenopsis, complex hybrid of course. To me, this has the look of being closer to species, but it could be a number of hybrids. I couldn't tell you which one, to be honest. There's so many that are similar in this kind of look. It's very beautiful, I love it. I picked it up in a garden centre or a supermarket, I can't remember when or wear, but it's a lovely reliable bloomer. Next, not actually in bloom yet, but this is the Caularthron bicornutum. I bought 2 of these and I actually sent one to my friend Nina in Spain. She has a YouTube channel, Ninja Orchids. I'll link her down below if you want to check her out. It's quite rare in Europe or in the European region. It's one of the grandparents of the Iwanagara or Jackfowlieara Appleblossom, which is quite famous for its fragrance, and I also have budding earlier in this video. So they both seem to be spring bloomers, triggered by obviously approaching warmer weather, longer days. When my orchids are blooming, I tend to bring them into the lounge to enjoy. This one has a reported fragrance of strawberries and candy floss, so I'm really excited to smell that when it does bloom. Couldn't show you my lounge grow area without showing you an African violet or 2. This is one that I'm particularly loving at the moment. It's got wonderful flowers that remind me of roses. They're just really pretty, and it's just a really prolific bloomer. African violets are obviously really fast growing, so I'm a little bit overwhelmed with them at the moment. I got them as like cuttings and they've just taken off, so now I'm actually struggling with the watering. This is a wide shot of the grow shelf. I'm still rearranging things. I brought a few things in from the conservatory over winter and just sort of plonked them here because it's warmer and more controlled environment, so I'm still not totally happy with the setup. This was just an odd bloom on my Phalaenopsis Gigabell, which is Gigantea crossed with Bellina, which is a wonderful orchid with a mild citrusy fragrance inherited from the Bellina. It has 2 more spikes on the way, so I'm really excited for that. It prefers warmer temperatures than the conservatory has been recently, which is why it is now in, along with my Bellina. The Violaceas and the other orchids in the conservatory are doing really well, but some are a little bit more sensitive to cold than others. This is just a quick show you my lounge windowsill and grow area and some orchids that I've smuggled behind the TV. My Rincostalis giganteas are still blooming. I did pollinate this red one with the peach and it has actually taken, but I'll have to see what comes of that. Rincostalis giganteas are my favourite type of orchids, so I'm excited to see if I can get any seeds to grow. Next up, I'm going to take you upstairs and show you some of my Miltoniopsis. This is one of my Eric Young Foundation Miltoniopsis hybrids, just 1 flower on this one for reasons that I will go into a bit more detail on in a little bit. It's got a wonderful rosy lemony fragrance that I absolutely love. This is my Miltoniopsis Sunglow Amazing, which I did actually do a video when I was unboxing and converting it to inorganic medium. I put it in Synthic first. It's now in semi-hydro with a mix of aquarium substrate, which I've shown in a previous video. If you want to see the first video for me unboxing and converting this orchid to inorganic media, I'll link that up in the corner and down below. It's doing really well. They're all doing really well. I did stress them a lot summer last year, putting them in the conservatory, so they have to live on windowsills now, which means I have got some botrytis showing on the lips of the Sunglow Amazing. This is because I've shut the curtains at night and they've brushed against the flowers and been resting against the flowers overnight. It's not ideal, but the alternative is I carry them down to the conservatory in winter and then move them up here in summer, and that's just a lot of moving things for me. This is another Miltoniopsis Eric Young Foundation hybrid. Really strong fragrance of like lemons and roses and all the nice things in the world. They have strongest fragrance sort of mid-morning to early afternoon that I've found. They do really well in these large self-watering pots. One thing that you kind of don't consider about Miltoniopsis when you first get them is as they become larger, they develop climbing habits often. This doesn't happen for all hybrids, but unfortunately it seems that the hybrids I have seem very predisposed to it. You may not notice this when you first get a lot of these hybrids because you'll often buy them as just 1 or 2 bulb divisions from supermarkets, flower shops, garden centres, or in this case I bought them from a nursery, but it's the same difference. If you get them as a small plant, you don't notice the climbing habit as much, and then as they get larger and it becomes more pronounced, it becomes more of a problem because those new root tips are emerging way above the media height. I've had to move these all into these large self-watering pots to accommodate for this. They seem to really enjoy these, to be honest. They're in all in the same sort of mixes of the aquarium substrate or Ceramis or Synthic mixed with lacquer. For me, they don't do well in lacquer alone because it's too dry of an environment for them, but they're all recovering really well and doing nicely. So that concludes my Orchids in Bloom and Orchid update today. Thank you so much for sticking with me on this bloom tour. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like or subscribe to my channel to see more Orchids in Bloom tours and updates. And I will hopefully see you guys again soon. Bye!